November the 4th, 1944. The Huertgen Forest swallows sound whole. Fog clings to broken pines, and somewhere below, the earth itself seems to be dying. Major Robert Hazlitt presses himself against a tree trunk and watches a 45-ton German Panther grind out of the mist, its tracks chewing through mud and splintered wood. His men are down there, curled into a foxhole, waiting for orders that will never come in time. Hazlitt opens his mouth to scream a warning. The Panther does not slow, it does not swerve. Steel tracks roll forward, and the hole simply stops existing. No explosion, no mercy, just silence where two young men used to be. A mile away, 9 American Sherman tanks are buried to their hulls in the same merciless mud, engines screaming, going nowhere. One lieutenant is about to make an impossible choice, split from his platoon, and drive straight into a battle he cannot win, with the wrong ammunition loaded in his gun. Before the sun sets 4 days from now, over 2,000 American soldiers will enter this forest. Fewer than 300 will walk back out. This is the story of the men who refuse to leave the rest behind. Make yourself comfortable with your favorite drink. Then check the time and tell us exactly what your clock says right now. We'd love to know what time people around the world are joining us. The forest does not look like a battlefield. It looks like the end of the world, quiet and rotting. Shattered pine trunks stand at broken angles, black against the gray sky, their splintered tops hanging by threads of bark. The ground underneath is a churned soup of mud and shell craters, deep enough in places to swallow a man to his waist. Fog moves through the trees in slow gray sheets, muffling sound, hiding shapes until they are close enough to touch. This is the Huertgen Forest, a stretch of dense woodland straddling the border between Belgium and Germany, and for weeks now it has been eating American divisions one at a time. Major Robert T. Hazlitt has been here long enough to know the sound of the place. He knows the difference between falling branches and incoming mortar rounds. He knows how mud swallows footsteps, and how fog swallows warnings. What he does not know, not until this exact moment, is how close death can creep before anyone sees it coming. He is crouched behind a shattered tree stump, binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the tree line for movement. His men, soldiers of the 28th Infantry Division, the outfit men call the Bloody Bucket for the crimson keystone patch on their shoulders and for the losses that patch has come to represent, are spread out below him in shallow foxholes dug into half-frozen earth. They have been fighting for this patch of forest for days, gaining yards, losing men, gaining them back. Then Hazlitt hears the engine. It is a low mechanical growl, rising out of the fog like something waking from a long sleep. He lowers his binoculars and squints into the gray. A shape resolves out of the mist, low and angular, moving with a confidence that no infantryman on this hill can match. A Panther. 45 tons of German steel, its long 75mm gun jutting forward like an accusation. It rolls out of the tree line without hesitation, without fear, because it has learned that American infantry in this forest has almost nothing that can stop it. Hazlitt's stomach drops. He knows exactly where that tank is heading. There is a foxhole directly in its path, dug into a shallow depression at the base of the slope, and inside that foxhole are 2 of his men, rifles ready, eyes fixed forward, watching for German infantry they cannot see coming from below. "Get out!" Hazlitt screams, his voice tearing through the fog. "Tank, get out of the hole!" But sound does not travel the way a man wants it to in this forest. The fog eats his words. The distance swallows them. The 2 soldiers in the hole never hear him, or if they do, they hear it a half-second too late. The Panther does not slow. Its tracks reach the lip of the foxhole and simply continue forward, grinding down into the earth, through the earth, and the hole where 2 young men had been sheltering is gone, flattened into the mud, as if it had never existed at all. Hazlitt stares. For one long moment, his mind refuses to process what his eyes have just recorded. There was no explosion, no muzzle flash, no warning shot, just the quiet, mechanical indifference of tracks rolling over ground, and 2 lives erased in the space of a single breath. He forces himself to move. There is no time to grieve. Not here, not now. More Panthers are emerging behind the first, and behind them, the boxy silhouettes of Panzer IVs, their turrets already swinging to track movement along the American line. Hazlitt grabs his radio handset, his fingers slick with cold sweat inside his gloves. All units, fall back. Fall back now. We have armor in the open. Repeat, we have armor in the open. His infantry begins to scramble backward through the mud, dragging wounded men, abandoning positions they bled for days to take. Hazlitt knows this retreat will not hold for long. Rifles and grenades cannot stop a Panther. Bazookas can, sometimes, if the range is close enough and the angle is right, but his men do not have bazooka teams forward, and even if they did, the Germans have learned to keep their infantry screening the tanks. What Hazlitt needs is armor of his own, American steel to meet German steel, and somewhere behind him, he knows, there should be tanks moving up to support this position. He can only pray they arrive before the Panthers reach the village at his back. A mile to the rear, down a narrow logging trail carved through the same brutal terrain, 9 Sherman tanks of the 707th Tank Battalion are fighting a different kind of battle. Their enemy here is not German armor. It is the forest itself. The trail is barely wide enough for a single tank, hemmed in on both sides by dense trees and a steep gorge that drops away into darkness. Days of rain have turned the packed earth into a bog, and the lead Sherman's tracks spin uselessly, throwing rooster tails of mud into the gray air. Inside the turret hatch, riding exposed to better see the path ahead, sits First Lieutenant Raymond Fleig, platoon leader, a young officer who has learned in the past weeks that maps and reality rarely agree with each other in this forest. Fleig watches the trees crowd closer on either side and feels the familiar tightening in his chest. A trail this narrow is a killing ground if the Germans have it covered. There is no room to maneuver, no room to turn, nowhere to go but forward or back. He keys his intercom, voice low and steady despite the knot in his stomach. "Driver, easy on the throttle. We hit a soft patch, we're not getting out easy." The words are barely out of his mouth when the world explodes beneath him. The blast comes from directly under the front of the tank, a violent upward punch that slams through the hull and throws Fleig hard against the hatch rim. For a half second, there is nothing but noise and light and the metallic scream of stressed steel. Inside the tank, his crew is thrown sideways, shouting, grabbing for anything solid. Smoke curls up from beneath the engine deck. Someone yells that they are hit, and for one terrible heartbeat, nobody knows if the tank is about to catch fire with all 5 of them still inside it. Then the smoke clears, and Fleig realizes what has happened. A mine. German engineers seeded this trail with mines days ago, and despite a sweep by American engineers earlier that morning, one has gone undetected, buried too deep or too well hidden in the churned mud. The explosion has torn into the track and suspension, but by some mercy it has not penetrated the hull. Nobody is bleeding, nobody is burning, but the tank is dead where it sits, one track blown apart, immovable, and worse, it is sitting directly in the center of the only path forward. Fleig drops down into the turret, checking his crew with quick, urgent questions. Everyone answers. Shaken, deafened, but alive, he allows himself exactly one breath of relief before his mind moves to the next problem, because behind him, 8 more Shermans are stacked up on a trail too narrow to pass, and somewhere up ahead, American infantry is waiting for tanks that cannot reach them. "We're not sitting here," Fleig says, already climbing back up through the hatch. "Get me a tow cable." The crew works fast, despite the fog closing in around them, despite the knowledge that a stalled convoy on a forest trail is an invitation for German artillery to walk rounds up and down the length of it. Fleig orders his platoon sergeant to rig the next Sherman in line to the crippled lead tank, using it as a deadweight anchor, so the second tank can inch its way around the wreck without sliding off the trail into the gorge below. It is a desperate, half-improvised maneuver, the kind of thing no manual teaches, and for a moment, it looks like it might fail entirely. The second Sherman lists hard to one side as its tracks search for purchase on the crumbling shoulder of the trail, mud sliding away beneath it in wet black sheets, the drop into the gorge only feet away. The cable snaps taut, holds. The tank rights itself and grinds past the wreck, free. One tank clear. 8 still trapped behind the ruined lead Sherman, and freeing them will take time that Fleig does not believe he has. He can hear it now, faint under the idle of engines, a rhythm of distant fire rolling down from the direction Hazlett's infantry disappeared toward hours earlier. Small arms, then something heavier. Tank fire. Fleig makes his decision in the space of a few seconds. He climbs onto the hull of the freed Sherman, orders its assigned commander to stay behind with the rest of the platoon and catch up the moment the trail is clear, and takes the tank himself. There is no time to gather a full company, no time to wait for reinforcement, no time to do this by the book. Somewhere ahead, American infantry is dying without armor to protect them, and Fleig intends to be the armor that arrives, even if he arrives alone. He drops into the commander's hatch and slams it shut behind him. "Driver, move out, fast as this mud allows." The lone Sherman lurches forward, mud and pine branches slapping against its hull, and disappears into the fog, leaving 8 stranded tanks behind it. Back at the edge of the village, Hazlett leads the remains of his infantry in a stumbling retreat through half-collapsed buildings and shattered stone walls. Behind them, framed against the tree line, a 45-ton Panther rolls into view, its long gun already tracking toward the retreating Americans. Behind it comes another, and another. A column of German armor is advancing on a village defended by exhausted infantry, with nothing heavier than rifles and a handful of bazookas. It is in that exact moment, with despair closing in as tight as the fog, that Hazlett hears an engine behind him that does not belong to the enemy. He turns, and through the drifting mist comes a single American Sherman, mud caked thick across its hull, branches and torn foliage still clinging to its fenders from the desperate run through the forest. Hazlett does not wait. He sprints toward the tank, waving his arms, pointing back toward the ridge where the German column is advancing. Fleig's hatch is open. He looks where Hazlett is pointing and sees them. Panthers and Panzer IVs spread across the rise, more armor than one Sherman has any right to face alone. For one heartbeat, doubt flickers across his face. Then it is gone, replaced by something harder, something that has no room left for fear. He nods once, grim and certain, and drops back into the turret. The lone Sherman surges forward, straight toward the German line. 200 yards. That is the distance between Fleig's Sherman and the Panther that has just turned its long 75mm gun toward the retreating American infantry. The German tank has not seen him yet. Its flank sits exposed, broadside on, the thick sloped armor of its front glacis turned uselessly away from him. If Fleig has ever been handed a perfect shot in this war, this is it. He drops into the turret and calls the range without a flicker of hesitation. "Gunner, shot, tank, 200. The gunner's eye is already pressed to the sight, the crosshairs settling on the dark mass of the Panther's hull. On the way, the Sherman's 75mm gun bucks, and the shell tears across the gap in a fraction of a second, slamming into the Panther's side in a bright orange flash. Fleig watches through his periscope, waiting for the German tank to shudder, to smoke, to die. Nothing happens. Just a dull thud, metal on metal, and the Panther rocks slightly on its suspension and keeps sitting there, engine idling, apparently untouched. Fleig's jaw tightens. Again, fire. The second round streaks out and hits nearly the same spot. Another flash, another thud, still nothing. No smoke, no flame, no sign that either shell has done a thing to the tank in front of him. What in the world is going on down there? Fleig snaps into the intercom. It is the loader who answers, and his voice carries a note of dawning horror. "Sir, there's nothing but high explosive in the ready rack." "I don't have a single armor-piercing round up here." The words land on Fleig like a physical blow. In the chaos of the mud-choked trail, when he abandoned his own crippled Sherman and climbed aboard this one, nobody thought to check what the previous commander had loaded into the ready rack beside the gun. High explosive rounds are built to shatter buildings and cut down infantry in the open, not to punch through 80 millimeters of sloped German steel. He has just fired 2 rounds that could never have hurt that Panther, no matter how perfect the shot. "Get me AP, move," Fleig barks, his voice sharp with urgency now. The loader lunges for the sponson rack along the turret wall where the armor-piercing rounds are stored, but his hands are shaking, and the angle is wrong. "I can't reach it, sir. The turret's in the way." It is the worst possible moment for the worst possible problem. To pull an armor-piercing round from the sponson rack, the turret has to be rotated clear of the storage bin, which means swinging the gun away from the enemy tank sitting 200 yards in front of them, in the middle of what has become, whether Fleig likes it or not, a gunfight. There is no good option left. Fleig gives the order anyway. "Turn it, now." The turret begins to rotate, the gun swinging away from the Panther just as the German crew inside that tank reaches its own breaking point. 2 hits, back to back, with no visible damage from outside, is exactly the kind of thing that convinces a tank crew their vehicle is about to erupt into flame from the inside. Nobody wants to be sealed inside 80 tons of burning steel. The hatches on the Panther fly open, and one by one the German crewmen scramble out into the open field, expecting fire, expecting the ammunition racks to start cooking off any second. But there is no fire, no smoke curling from the engine deck, no orange glow behind the driver's viewport, just a puzzled, frightened crew standing exposed beside their own tank, and a German commander with binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning for whatever hit them. He finds it. The lone Sherman, turret turned away, clearly not tracking them anymore. His stomach drops as the truth becomes obvious. They were struck by high explosive rounds, not armor-piercing. There was never any danger of the tank catching fire. Evacuating was a catastrophic mistake, and now his crew is standing in the open, unprotected, while the enemy gun is still very much alive. "Back in!" he screams. "Get back into the tank now." The German crew scrambles back toward the hull, hauling themselves up over the hot armor plating, while American infantry, seeing Germans exposed in the open, opens fire from the tree line and the shattered buildings behind them. Bullets crack past the scrambling crewmen as they dive back through their hatches, and that panicked, undignified retreat back into their own tank costs them precious seconds, seconds that Fleig desperately needs. Inside the Sherman, the turret finally clears the sponson rack. The loader wastes no time, hauling up an armor-piercing round and clutching it like his life depends on it, because at this moment, it very much does. At the same moment, the Panther's own turret begins grinding back around toward the Sherman, its crew finally back at their stations, finally understanding what kind of fight they are actually in. 2 war machines, each nearly blind for a critical stretch of seconds, now race to bring their guns back on target. Inside the Panther, the driver revs the engine hard, building hydraulic pressure to power the traverse. Inside the Sherman, the gunner fights the controls, forcing the gun back around toward the enemy. "Up!" the loader shouts, slamming the round home into the breech. But the Panther gets there first. Its high-velocity 75mm gun fires from a burst of muzzle flame, and the shell screams across the gap between the 2 tanks, whistling just over the top of Fleig's turret. A miss, by inches, but a miss all the same. Inside the Panther, the commander feels his stomach twist. His shot has failed, and now his flank is turned toward the enemy gun, fully exposed, with a turret that rotates slower than his hull can turn. The Sherman's gunner does not need to be told twice. The Panther fills his sight, and he fires. The armor-piercing shell streaks across the field and smashes directly into the base of the Panther's long gun barrel, shearing it apart in a shower of sparks and torn metal. For a moment, nobody inside Fleig's Sherman can quite believe what they have just witnessed. An impossible shot, the kind of thing that happens once in 100 engagements, and it has just happened to them. Inside the crippled Panther, the commander shouts for another round and is met by his gunner's pale, stricken face. The barrel is gone. The German tank, 45 tons of armored steel that had rolled through this forest unafraid of anything the Americans could throw at it, is now nothing more than a toothless wreck sitting in the open. "Oh my God," the commander whispers, and there is no time left for him to say anything else. Fleig does not give the enemy crew a single second to recover or abandon ship again. Hit it again! The next armor-piercing round tears into the Panther's hull, punching through side armor that was never built to survive a direct hit from this angle. A second round follows immediately after, and this time there is no ambiguity about the result. The left side of the tank rips open, and flames burst outward in a roaring column of orange and black smoke. None of the German crew make it out of the inferno. Fleig's men let out a ragged cheer inside the turret, the release of pressure that comes when death has been staring you in the face and then suddenly looks away. But Fleig is already looking past the burning wreck, scanning the tree line, because a fight like this is never over just because one enemy tank is dead. 3 Panzer IVs are rolling up behind the burning Panther, spreading out into a loose line, advancing with the deliberate confidence of tanks that have not yet learned what happened to their comrade. If Fleig is going to survive the next few minutes, he knows he has to fire faster than the Germans can react. Gunner shot tank 180. The turret swings toward the nearest Panzer IV. Fire! The shell punches clean through the German tank's armor and knocks it out with a single decisive blow. Unlike the Panther, the Panzer IV's armor is far thinner, far less capable of shrugging off a direct hit, and it dies where it sits, smoke pouring from every hatch. The Sherman's turret is already swinging toward the next target when the German gunners, finally reacting, bring their own gun to bear on Fleig's tank. For one held breath, it looks like the duel might finally turn against the lone American crew. Then another shell, not from Fleig's gun, slams into the Panzer IV and tears it apart in a shower of debris. Through the drifting smoke along the crest of the hill, 2 mud-covered Shermans emerge from the tree line. Fleig's platoon, the tanks that had been stuck behind his crippled lead vehicle back on the trail, have finally fought their way free of the mud and arrived to even the odds. For the first time all morning, Fleig allows himself the ghost of a smile. The last Panzer IV, seeing its companions destroyed and now facing 3 American tanks instead of 1, tries a desperate shot on the move, its gun swinging wildly as the driver guns the engine in a bid to escape. The round goes wide, burying itself harmlessly in the mud. It is the German crew's last chance, and they have wasted it. Fleig's gunner steadies the sight, fires, and sends a round straight through the Panzer's turret ring. The tank dies exactly where it stands, its crew never given the chance to bail out. With the Panther burning and both lead panzers destroyed, the German assault along this stretch of the line begins to falter. Engines reverse. Smoke thickens as the surviving vehicles pull back from the American positions, retreating into the cover of the tree line they had emerged from less than an hour earlier. Fleig tracks one retreating Panzer IV as it throws mud from its spinning tracks and vanishes into the haze. Miles behind the front, in the headquarters of the 116th Panzer Division, General Major Siegfried von Waldenberg receives the report from a shaken tank commander who has just watched his column collapse. Several panzers destroyed, 1 Panther burned to a hulk. Von Waldenberg's expression hardens as he asks the obvious question. How many enemy tanks did this? 3 Sherman tanks, sir. Perhaps 4. It is an unacceptable answer. A handful of American tanks should not be capable of stopping an entire armored thrust, and von Waldenberg knows that if this small American force is allowed to hold its ground, reinforcements will follow, and the initiative his division worked so hard to seize will slip away entirely. There is no room left for hesitation. He orders every remaining panzer under his command sent forward, with instructions to burn the American position to the ground before it can be reinforced. By morning, 13 Panthers rumble out of the mist toward the shattered village, trailed by a column of Panzer IVs and German infantry advancing behind the armor for cover. The German tanks settle onto the far slope of a low ridge, positioning themselves carefully outside the effective range of American bazookas, and begin a steady, punishing bombardment of the village and the American positions dug in around it. For the defenders, reinforcements are thin on the ground, but help does arrive in the form of a platoon of M10 tank destroyers, lightly armored, fast-moving vehicles mounting a 3-inch gun, led by First Lieutenant Turney W. Leonard of the 893rd Tank Destroyer Battalion. Fleig, Hazlitt, and Leonard are pulled together and given a single order: stop the German buildup before it overwhelms what remains of the American line. Despite the losses of the previous day, the three officers put together a plan in the cold gray light before dawn. The Germans have positioned themselves on high ground, screened by trees, confident in their advantage of numbers and elevation. Fleig will take his Shermans up onto the crest directly in front of the German line, deliberately drawing their fire and their attention. While every German eye and every German gun is fixed on his tanks, Leonard will swing his M10 destroyers wide to the right, working around through the forest to come up behind the German armor from an angle nobody is watching. If they can knock out the tanks screening the position, the way opens for American infantry to retake the ridge. It is a plan built on desperation as much as tactics, and every man involved knows exactly how much it will cost if it fails. Morning brings a heavy fog rolling low across the churned fields, and under its cover, Leonard's M10 destroyers peel off to the right, grinding through the mist on the long route around the German flank. At the same time, Fleig's 3 Shermans begin grinding up the slope toward the crest of the ridge. Through the drifting fog, Fleig spots German armor on the far side of the field, tanks tucked between the tree line, and stacks of hay used as improvised camouflage. His 3 Shermans are about to draw fire from what looks like an entire line of German armor, and there is a cold, heavy weight in his chest as he gives the order anyway. "Gunner, target that panzer in the center. Fire." The shell screams across the open field and bursts in the trees beside a German tank. Immediately, German crews scramble back to their vehicles, hunting for the source of the incoming fire. Muzzles flash across the ridge as Panthers and Panzer IVs swing their turrets toward Fleig's exposed position and open up with everything they have. Shells whip low across the field, smashing through branches and splintering tree trunks just behind the 3 American tanks. The bait has been taken. "Driver, back us down, now!" Fleig shouts, and all 3 Shermans drop back behind the reverse slope of the ridge, out of direct line of sight, the German shells crashing into empty ground where they had been seconds earlier. The moment they reach cover, Fleig gives the next order: back up again. It becomes a grinding, nerve-shredding routine. Climb to the crest, fire fast, drop back below the ridge before the return fire can find them, then do it again. From the German side of the field, the effect is exactly what Fleig intends. Muzzle flashes keep appearing from different points along the crest, and to the German gunners, it looks as though there are far more American tanks up there than the 3 actually grinding back and forth along that ridgeline. "Concentrate all fire on that hill," comes the order from the German side, and the response is immediate and overwhelming. Tank fire, mortar rounds, and artillery all begin crashing down onto the crest in a rolling wave of explosions. 1 Sherman falls back trailing smoke, its turret jammed and useless, the crew inside deafened and shaken but alive. The incoming fire is becoming too heavy for 3 tanks to absorb much longer. Across the field, hidden by fog and the noise of the barrage, Leonard's tank destroyers are struggling to close the distance for their flank attack. The German tanks and infantry, fixated entirely on the Shermans hammering away from the ridge, have no idea an entire platoon of M10s is working its way around behind them. The risky plan is, for the moment, working exactly as intended. All Leonard needs now is a few more minutes to get his destroyers into position for a shot into the unprotected rear of the German line. Then the ground betrays them. Leonard feels a sudden violent jolt as his M10 grinds to a halt, its tracks caught fast on a buried stump or a half-sunken boulder hidden beneath the churned mud. He looks to his left, just in time to see a second destroyer lose traction entirely, its tracks spinning uselessly in the soft ground. Within seconds, the entire flanking attack has ground to a standstill, stuck fast in mud that has swallowed everything from Sherman tanks to supply trucks throughout this campaign. German infantry, sweeping the tree line for exactly this kind of threat, spot the stranded American vehicles almost immediately. Mortar rounds begin falling around the stuck M10s, and the open-top turrets that make these tank destroyers so useful in an ambush now become deadly traps under indirect fire. Machine gun fire snaps out of the trees, forcing crews to duck low behind whatever armor they have. Even stuck fast in the mud, the M10s still carry enough firepower to kill German armor from where they sit. But under this weight of incoming fire, nobody can get a clean shot lined up. "No eyes on target, sir," comes the shout from inside the nearest destroyer. Leonard does not hesitate. He grabs his binoculars, throws open the hatch, and climbs out into the open, into a field being swept by mortar fire and machine gun bursts from 3 directions at once. "Get ready to fire. I'll get you eyes on target." Bullets snap past him as he sprints toward higher ground for a better vantage point. From the crest of a low rise, he spots the German armor screened behind stacked hay, firing lanes deliberately cut through the cover to give the Panthers clear shots at the American position without exposing themselves. He memorizes the layout in seconds and turns to sprint back toward his stranded vehicles. He does not make it back untouched. A sharp crack cuts through the noise of battle, and Leonard feels the impact as a bullet punches into his arm. Pain lances through him, and for a moment his legs nearly buckle beneath him. He forces the scream back down his throat and keeps running, one arm hanging useless at his side, blood soaking through his sleeve. He staggers back to the nearest M10 and slams his good hand against the hull. "Haystack! 200 yards! Traverse right!" The destroyer's 3-inch gun swings around and fires with a hard, flat crack that cuts through the chaos. Before the smoke has even cleared, Leonard is already moving again, sprinting back toward the German position to correct the aim for the next shot, refusing to let his wound slow him down even as blood continues to soak through his uniform. On the ridge, Fleig's 2 remaining operational Shermans continue their grinding routine of firing and falling back, and he glances hopefully to his right, expecting by now to see Leonard's destroyers finally in position to hammer the exposed German flank. Instead, what he sees through the drifting smoke is a cluster of M10s bunched together, barely a couple hundred yards from where they started, stuck fast and going nowhere. For a moment, Fleig weighs the only sane option left to him: pull back off the ridge, save what remains of his shrinking platoon, cut his losses. But he knows exactly what will happen if he does. Every Panther and Panzer IV on that ridge will pivot its full attention onto Leonard's stranded, defenseless destroyers, the instant his own Shermans stop drawing fire. If there is any chance of giving those trapped crews a fighting chance to survive, he has to keep the German guns pointed at him instead. "Those poor souls need our help," Fleig says quietly over the intercom. "Maintain fire." His remaining Shermans roll back up to the crest for another exposed shot, and this time, one of them lingers on target just a fraction of a second too long, giving a German gunner across the field exactly the window he needs. The shell bursts directly in front of the tank in a blinding flash, and for one horrifying moment, it looks as though the Sherman has been destroyed outright. Then it reverses hard through the smoke and drifts back down the slope, miraculously still intact, engine still running. But once it reaches the safety of the reverse slope, it stops moving entirely. Inside the turret, the gunner grabs for the manual traverse crank, straining against it with both hands. Nothing moves. The shock of the near miss has jammed the turret ring solid, leaving the tank able to move but unable to bring its gun to bear on anything. Two of Fleig's three tanks are now effectively crippled, weapons pointed uselessly in whatever direction they happened to be facing when the damage hit. Only Fleig's own tank remains fully capable of fighting, and he keeps it moving, refusing to let the mounting losses slow the rhythm they have built. He brings it up over the crest one more time and catches the exposed side of a German tank through a gap in the drifting smoke. Gunner, AP tank, 600. On the way. The armor-piercing round streaks across the field and slams home. The German tank jerks violently sideways as flame bursts out through a ruptured seam in its hull, another confirmed kill added to a morning already thick with wreckage. But the moment costs Fleig immediately. A returning German shell strikes the ground just short of his tank, skips upward off the frozen mud, and slams directly into his own turret ring. His gunner's voice comes through sharp with alarm over the sound of the impact still ringing in everyone's ears. "We're jammed. I can't traverse." All three of Fleig's Shermans are now effectively unable to fight, their guns frozen in place, their crews reduced to sitting inside armored boxes that can no longer strike back. Fleig throws one last desperate glance toward Leonard's position, his heart climbing into his throat as he watches the wounded lieutenant sprinting from cover to cover between bursts of machine gun fire, still directing his stranded destroyers onto German positions, despite the blood soaking down his arm. Then Fleig's hope curdles into horror as a German mortar round lands almost directly beside his comrade. Leonard goes down hard, thrown backward by the force of the blast, and does not immediately rise. The blast has thrown Leonard hard onto his back, and the world around him dissolves into a ringing blur of smoke and pain. His left arm, already bleeding from the bullet wound taken minutes earlier, has been shattered below the shoulder by the mortar fragment, the damage far worse than anything a man should be able to survive on his feet. The cold mud beneath him seeps through his uniform, and the taste of blood and cordite fills his mouth as he blinks up at a gray sky he can barely focus on. Medics reach him within moments, dropping to their knees in the mud beside him, morphine syringe already in hand, shouting for a litter team to move him back immediately. Leonard's eyes are unfocused, his breathing ragged, but when the medic leans down and insists he has to be carried out now, something in him refuses. Through the pain and the shock, he manages to shake his head and forces the words out between clenched teeth. "Leave me a rifle and get the hell out of here." It is the last coherent order anyone hears him give. The medics hesitate, torn between the oath that bound them to save him and the sound of German infantry pressing closer through the smoke with every passing second. There is no time left to argue, and no litter team that can reach this position and survive the effort. They lay a rifle within reach of his good hand, press a field dressing as tightly as they can manage against the ruin of his arm, and pull back toward the American line, the weight of the decision settling onto their shoulders like a stone none of them will ever fully set down. Turney Leonard is never seen alive again. On the ridge above, Fleig has no way of knowing exactly what has happened to his comrade, only that the man who spent the entire morning sprinting through machine gun fire to guide his stranded destroyers onto target has gone down and not gotten back up. There is nothing more he can do for him. Every one of his three Shermans now sits with a jammed turret, guns frozen uselessly in place, unable to fire another shot in support of anyone. "Pull back," Fleig orders, his voice flat with exhaustion and grief he does not have time to feel yet. The three crippled Shermans reverse away from the crest and withdraw toward a shallow wooded draw to the north, moving out of the direct line of German fire as best their frozen guns and battered hulls will allow. Behind them, the Germans realize almost immediately that the ridge has been yielded, and the advance resumes with a vengeance. Artillery, mortars, and tank fire begin sweeping across the open ground and into the village beyond it, methodically working from one end of the American position to the other. Fleig climbs down from his wounded Sherman in the cover of the trees and watches as Hazlitt leads the last of his surviving infantry back through the mud, faces gray with exhaustion, weapons held loosely in hands too tired to shake anymore. Some of them are missing helmets, others are missing rifles, having thrown away anything that slowed them down during the scramble off the ridge. Nobody speaks above a whisper, as if the forest itself might hear them and call the artillery back down. There is a standing order for retreating armor crews to disable and destroy any tank they are forced to abandon on the field, denying the Germans any chance of recovering a working American vehicle. One of Fleig's crewmen climbs up onto the hull with a hand grenade and a length of wire, ready to rig the charge and finish the job. Fleig stops him with a raised hand. "Let me do it." He takes the grenade himself and climbs up onto the hull of the tank that carried him alone through the forest, into the German column, through a duel with a Panther that should have ended in his own death, and out the other side still breathing. He ties the wire to the hatch, pulls the pin, and reaches down into the turret one final time before dropping back to the ground and moving quickly away. Behind him, his crew disappears down into the dark gorge leading away from the ridge, and the muffled thump of the explosion follows them into the trees, the sound of the Sherman dying so that nothing useful is left behind for the enemy to find. The slopes leading down into the gorge are slick with mud and shattered branches, the darkness beneath the shattered canopy nearly total now that the fog has thickened into evening. The air smells of wet pine, spent powder, and something underneath that nobody wants to name. Cold has settled deep into every soaked uniform, and more than one man's teeth chatter loud enough to draw a hissed warning from the soldier beside him. With no light to guide them and German patrols still active somewhere in the trees around them, the surviving men form a human chain, each soldier keeping one hand on the shoulder or the belt of the man ahead of him, feeling their way blindly through the black forest one step at a time. It very nearly works. Then German mortars, walking fire through the trees on nothing more than sound and guesswork, find the gorge. Shells crash down through the canopy and tear into the retreating column, and in the chaos and the darkness, the human chain breaks apart. Men lose their grip on each other, scatter in different directions, and one group, driven off course into the thick underbrush by the explosions, disappears into the darkness and is never seen walking out of that forest again. Fleig pushes on through the black trees with the survivors still close enough to follow him, counting heads whenever the terrain allows him a moment to do it, feeling the number shrink with every mile. He does not allow himself to stop and search for the missing. Stopping in this forest, at night, with German patrols still moving somewhere close by, is its own kind of death sentence, and the only mercy he can offer the men behind him is to keep moving toward the American lines. In the exhausting days that follow, small groups of survivors continue filtering back through the forest by whatever route they can find. Around midnight on the 8th of November, Lieutenant Fleig and 6 exhausted soldiers finally stumble out of the tree line and into the American assembly area at Wassenach, filthy, freezing, and barely able to stand. Someone presses a canteen into Fleig's hands. He stares at it for a long moment before he remembers what to do with it. Of the more than 2,200 men of the regimental combat team of the 28th Infantry Division, committed to the fight for Schmidt and Kommerscheidt, little more than 300 come out the other side able to fight. The Bloody Bucket earns its name over those 4 days in a way no soldier who survived it will ever be able to fully put into words. Entire companies simply cease to exist on paper, their names surviving only in casualty reports and in the memories of the few men left standing who can still recall the faces that went with them. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond E. Fleig survives the war, for his actions leading a single Sherman tank alone into a German armored column, destroying a Panther and multiple Panzer IVs, and later returning to draw fire away from the stranded crews of the 893rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, he is awarded the Silver Star. He goes on to write the official history of his own battalion, preserving in his own words the 4 days that nearly ended his life in the mud and fog of the Huertgen Forest. First Lieutenant Turney W. Leonard does not survive. His body remains unrecovered in the forest for years after the fighting ends, finally located and identified in 1956, years after the battle that took his life. He is brought home and laid to rest in Dallas, Texas. On the 1st of September 1945, Turney Leonard is posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the United States military's highest decoration, for his refusal to leave his men even after his arm was shattered beyond saving, and for the reckless courage that carried him through open, fire-swept ground again and again to give his stranded destroyers a fighting chance. The forest itself gives up its dead slowly. For years after the fighting moves on, foresters and farmers in the region continue to find the rusted remains of Sherman tanks and German Panthers half buried in the undergrowth, gun barrels snapped, hulls scorched black, silent markers of 4 days when a handful of American tankers, tank destroyer crews, and infantrymen refused to abandon each other no matter what rolled out of the mist to meet them. The Huertgen Forest never had a single dramatic turning point, no single battle that broke the German line or opened the road to victory. It was simply attrition, yard by yard, tree by tree, fought by men who kept climbing back into their tanks and back onto their feet long after any reasonable person would have stopped. What Fleig and Leonard and Hazlitt and the men beside them bought with 4 days of mud, fire, and impossible choices was not a breakthrough. It was time, and the survival of the men behind them, purchased at a cost that the numbers alone can never fully explain. There is no monument in that forest large enough to hold the weight of what happened there. No single statue for a lieutenant who drove a broken-down tank alone into a column of German armor because his infantry had no one else to call on. No single plaque for a wounded officer who crawled through open ground under machine gun fire because his gunners could not see what he could see. What remains instead are names on casualty lists, a silver star pinned to a survivor's chest, and a Medal of Honor delivered to a family in Texas for a son who never came home to receive it himself. 4 days in the mud of the Huertgen Forest, and the cost of holding a single stretch of broken ground against 13 Panthers and everything behind them, measured out in the lives of men who simply refused to leave each other behind.